The crystal chandelier sparkled like stars trapped inside the conference room on the 42nd floor of Cross Global. The vast space, floored with gleaming marble, reflected the tense faces of the senior directors. The atmosphere was heavy, suffocating, as if the very air itself was holding its breath. At the center of the long conference table, Ethan Cross, the young CEO of the corporation, sat upright, his deep blue eyes cold as ice. His hands gripped a Mont Blanc pen so tightly that its tip trembled over the blank sheet of paper, the only sign betraying the turmoil churning inside him. The meeting with the Swiss conglomerate, a billion-dollar project, was only minutes away from starting. But the problem was, the professional interpreter, hired to handle the complex German terms, had disappeared without a single explanation. No phone call, no message, no trace. Only a brief email sent to Vivian, Ethan's senior assistant, stating, "Personal emergency." Vivian, her blonde hair pinned up in an elegant bun and a cold, sharp smile on her lips, had just delivered this news in a tone suspiciously calm. "I tried to reach him, Mr. Cross," she said, her gaze flicking over Ethan, "but it seems we'll have to postpone the meeting." "Postpone?" Ethan's voice was edged like a blade. He shot to his feet, his tall frame in an expensive gray suit casting an invisible pressure over the entire room. "You know exactly how important this project is. Postponing means handing this contract straight to our competitors." His lips pressed into a harsh, rigid line, concealing the panic screaming inside his chest. If he lost this contract, not only would Cross Global's reputation be threatened, but his position as CEO, something he had fought for years to secure, would be at risk. The conference room door creaked open, a small sound that nonetheless drew every eye. Claire Bennett stepped inside, her cleaning cart rattling across the marble floor. The loose-fitting silver-gray janitor's uniform hung over her petite frame, her brown hair tied up messily, a few strands falling over her forehead. She kept her head down, avoiding curious glances, focused on wheeling her cart into the corner, where she usually worked quietly. But today she couldn't be invisible like any other day. The hushed murmurs from the directors and their fleeting looks of disdain made her chest tighten. Claire bit her lip, trying to suppress the feeling that she was intruding on a world she didn't belong to. She knew that if the project failed, the consequences would be severe for the company. Many people could lose their jobs. "We have no other option," Vivian continued, her voice smooth but cold. "The Swiss partners will not accept a meeting without a professional interpreter. I'll reschedule." "I can serve as the German interpreter, sir." A small but steady voice cut Vivian off. Claire stood there, the broom still in her hand. Every gaze in the room turned to her, like arrows piercing through the thin janitor's uniform. Ethan turned, his brows knitting together, his sharp eyes sweeping over her, as if he were truly seeing her for the first time. "What did you say?" Ethan's voice was icy, though there was a flicker of curiosity in it. Claire took a deep breath, her fingers clenching the broom handle until her knuckles turned white. She knew she was standing at a dangerous crossroads. I can try," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I know German, and I have some knowledge of business. If you allow me, I can translate." Silence fell over the room, so heavy Claire could hear her heart hammering in her chest. Vivian burst into laughter, a sharp sound like shattering glass. "Miss Bennett, isn't it? A janitor?" She tilted her head, her eyes glinting with ridicule. "You think you're qualified to replace a professional interpreter in a billion-dollar contract negotiation?" "Qualified or not, let her try," Ethan interrupted, his voice still cold but with a different undertone, a fragile, almost desperate thread of hope. He looked at Claire, his deep blue eyes searching for something in hers. "Are you sure?" Claire nodded, even though her legs were trembling beneath the uniform. "I'm sure, sir." The conference room doors opened wide and the Swiss partners entered in their elegant suits and keen gazes. They sat down, exchanging a few sentences in German, their tone calm but not hiding their impatience. Ethan gestured for Claire to step forward, and she could feel every pair of eyes drilling into her back. She stood tall, trying to ignore the janitor's uniform that made her look so out of place in the luxurious room. Her hands shook lightly as she held the thick stack of documents, but when she finally spoke, her voice was unexpectedly steady. Guten Tag, meine Damen und Herren, she began, her tone clear, her pronunciation flawless as a native speaker's. The Swiss partners looked up, their eyes shifting from skepticism to curiosity. Claire translated each clause of the contract, from the technical details about logistics to the complex financial terms. But she didn't stop there. She added sharp insights about business strategy, highlighting cross-global strengths she had read about in internal documents. If you're considering expanding into Eastern Europe, she said, her eyes bright as she looked straight at Hans Muller, the Swiss delegation leader, we can propose a route that optimizes shipping costs by up to 10%. The room went still. No more whispers. Hans Muller broke into a rare smile and nodded, clearly pleased. Ausgezeichnet, he said in a warm baritone. Very impressive. You are not just an interpreter, you are a strategist. From his seat behind her, Ethan rested his chin on his hand, his eyes never leaving Claire. For the first time during the meeting, his chest felt lighter, as if the weight of hundreds of millions of dollars had been lifted off his shoulders. But more than that, what he couldn't look away from was the woman standing before him, not an invisible janitor, but an intelligent, confident woman, with a brilliant light in her blue eyes. When the meeting ended, the Swiss partners shook Ethan's hand, promising a follow-up discussion. But before they left, Hans Muller turned to Claire and said in English, "You are a valuable asset to Cross Global." Claire smiled and lowered her head in thanks. But when her gaze happened to meet Ethan's, her heart skipped a beat. He didn't smile, but his eyes, deep, complex, were looking at her in an entirely different way. No longer the gaze of a CEO at a cleaning staff, but the look of a man drawn into something far bigger than himself. As everyone filed out of the room, Vivian lingered, her lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes flashing with a jealousy she couldn't hide. Claire didn't notice. She simply pushed her cleaning cart quietly out of the room. But inside her, a small flame had been lit, a flame of hope, of opportunity, and of something she didn't yet dare to name. You're watching Soul Stories, where every story whispers of love, healing, and hope. Let us know which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and be a part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. A light rain fell on the narrow street in Queens, where old buildings crowded together under a dull gray sky. Claire stepped off the last bus, her tattered umbrella unable to keep the droplets from soaking into her messy brown hair. She was still wearing her janitor uniform, faded and worn thin, a constant reminder of the distance between her and the bright glow of the Cross Global Conference room that morning. In her hand, she clutched an old canvas bag containing a loaf of bread and a box of medicine, everything she could afford, after spending most of her wages to pay for her mother's hospital bills. Claire's apartment was on the third floor of a building with no elevator, the hallway filled with the smell of mildew and the sound of crying children. She pushed the door open, and the dim light from an old table lamp spilled across the stained walls. In the corner, her mother, Margaret, lay on a narrow bed, her eyes closed, her breathing as frail as a candle about to go out. Claire set the bag down and stepped over quietly, adjusting the thin blanket across her mother's chest. "Mom, I'm home," she whispered, her voice gentle but carrying a nameless ache. Margaret slowly opened her eyes, her cracked lips forming a weak smile. "My girl, how was today?" Claire smiled, but her eyes shimmered with a deep sadness. "It was good, Mom. Today, I spoke with some important people." She didn't share the details, not because she wanted to hide them, but because she was afraid she might start believing that the brilliant moment in that boardroom was real, that it was something that could actually change her life. Instead, she poured a glass of water and helped her mother sip it in small, careful gulps, her hands trembling as she thought about everything that had happened. The meeting with the Swiss conglomerate still felt like a dream. The astonished looks, Hans Muller's praise, and Ethan Cross's gaze sharp, searching, as if he was trying to see past the janitor's uniform she wore. But here, in this cramped apartment, reality pulled her back. She wasn't some brilliant strategist. She wasn't a hero who had saved a billion-dollar contract. She was just Claire Bennett, a 26-year-old woman who had once dreamed big, but now kept her head down beneath the weight of mounting bills. Late at night, after her mother had fallen asleep, Claire sat by the small window, the faint glow of the street lamp illuminating her face. On the table lay an old book, Principles of International Business, its cover torn and the pages marked with yellow highlighter from her college days. She turned each page slowly, her fingers brushing over the familiar lines, as though she were searching for the version of herself she had left behind in those words. A cold draft slipped through the window frame, making her shiver, but she didn't get up to close it. She wanted to feel the chill, a reminder that she was still alive, still hoping. Memories flooded back, sharp and vivid like an old film reel. 4 years ago, Claire had been the rising star of her prestigious university. She'd won a full scholarship for her outstanding performance in linguistics and business, dreaming of becoming a diplomat or an international trade specialist. The passionate debates in class, the long nights poring over essays on globalization strategy, and the proud look in her mother's eyes when she accepted the award for top student, all of it was now just memory. Everything changed when her mother fell ill. Heart disease, the doctors said, with little chance of improvement. Claire hadn't hesitated to leave school, sell her beloved laptop, and take a janitorial job at Cross Global to cover the medical bills and care for her mother. She didn't regret it, but sometimes in her weakest moments, she wondered if she'd ever have a chance to go back. She opened a small notebook where she had written down German and French vocabulary, along with business ideas she picked up from books. One day, she promised herself, I'll go back. I'll prove I'm not just a janitor. The next morning, pale dawn light slipped through the curtains. Claire prepared a simple breakfast, a slice of toast, and a cup of tea for her mother. Margaret held her hand, her voice faint but full of love. You are my pride, Claire. Never forget that. Those words were like medicine, soothing the ache in her heart. Claire kissed her mother's forehead, promised she'd be home early, and hurried out to catch the bus to Cross Global. On the ride, she stared out the window, her eyes distant. Yesterday, she had stepped out of the shadows of invisibility, if only for a moment. But Ethan's eyes, the way he had watched her so intently, kept replaying in her mind. Had he seen something in her? Or was it just a fleeting surprise? Claire shook her head and let out a small, self-mocking laugh. Don't be foolish, Claire, she whispered. You're just a cleaner. No degree. No experience. But deep inside, a tiny flicker of hope remained. Yesterday, she had done the impossible. Today, maybe she would keep waiting for a chance to prove that her bright past wasn't entirely buried, that she could rise again, no matter what. The golden-orange light of late afternoon filtered through the towering windows of Cross Global, casting a warm but somehow cold glow across the hallway of the 15th floor. Claire pushed her cleaning cart, the wheels rattling in rhythm with the steady hum of the air conditioning. She had just finished wiping down a row of desks, sweat beading on her forehead, but her mind was still adrift in the meeting from the day before. Yet now, alone in the quiet expanse of the office, she reminded herself it had only been a fleeting moment, a brief dream she didn't dare cling to. The HR office door swung open, and a tall figure stepped out, making Claire jump. Ethan, dressed in a navy blue suit that fit perfectly, his dark hair neatly combed, stood there with an expression of determination she couldn't quite decipher. He paused, his gaze sweeping the hall before locking onto her. Claire lowered her head, her hand gripping the broom handle as though his eyes could see straight through her. Ms. Bennett, his voice called out deep and clear, without the usual icy edge she had heard in the boardroom. I need to speak with you. Claire looked up, her brown eyes wide with surprise. Mr. Cross, is there something wrong? Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear but from the shock of his unexpected presence. Ethan, the man everyone in the company respected and feared, was now standing before her, an invisible janitor no one had ever noticed. Come with me, Ethan said, not waiting for a reply before turning and walking toward a small conference room at the end of the corridor. Claire hesitated, glanced at her cart, then quickly set the broom aside and wiped her hands on her apron before following. Her heart pounded so hard it felt as if she already knew this conversation would change everything. Inside the conference room, light from the large windows fell across the sharp planes of Ethan's face. He leaned back against the table, arms folded over his chest, his eyes fixed on Claire as she closed the door behind her. I've reviewed your file, he began, his tone calm but precise, as though he were assessing a critical piece on a chessboard. Outstanding student in linguistics and business, full scholarship, awards in international debate competitions. But you dropped out. Why? Claire's throat felt dry. She hadn't expected him to look into her past, let alone confront her so directly about it. She stood straight, trying to steady her voice. My mother became very ill, sir. I had to take care of her, and I needed money for her medical bills. She paused, her gaze dropping to the floor, as if those memories were wounds that still hadn't healed. Ethan nodded slightly, but his eyes held no pity, only a quiet respect. Yesterday, you didn't just save the meeting. You impressed the Swiss partners. They want you involved in future negotiations. He paused again, watching her reaction. I want you to join the international projects team and work directly with me. A 3-month trial period starting next week. What do you think? Claire blinked as if she couldn't trust her own ears. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. In her mind, 1,000 thoughts collided. Excitement, fear, and a small voice whispering that this might be some cruel joke. Sir, I'm just a janitor. I don't have a degree, no official experience. Are you sure? Ethan tilted his head slightly, a rare smile touching his lips. I don't care who you are on paper. I care about what you did yesterday. You have talent, Claire, and I need someone like you. Claire felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. Thank you, sir. I'll do my very best. The conference room door opened quietly, and Vivian stepped inside, her fitted business dress emphasizing her slim figure. Her perfect smile faltered for a split second when she saw Claire standing there, but she quickly regained her composure. Mr. Cross, she said, her voice smooth but edged with something calculating. I've just received the report from finance. Is there anything you need me to handle? Her gaze flicked over Claire, a fleeting chill in her eyes as if she were sizing up a new threat. Ethan looked at Vivian, his expression sharp and authoritative. Vivian, Ms. Bennett will be joining the international projects team for a 3-month probation. Prepare the necessary paperwork and arrange her schedule. His tone was calm but left no room for doubt, his authority absolute. Vivian nodded, her smile unchanged, but her fingers tightened around the folder. She held a small sign of carefully hidden displeasure. Yes, sir. I'll see to it right away. She dipped her head in polite acknowledgement, but with a trace of calculation in the gesture, then turned to leave, not without casting Claire a last glance, a silent warning in her eyes. Today, Claire officially started on the international projects team. The cross-global offices were quiet, lit only by the glow of computer screens. Claire sat at a corner of the long table, dozens of documents about the Swiss project spread out before her. She pushed her old glasses higher on her nose, her hands moving quickly as she flipped through page after page, taking detailed notes in pencil. The smell of ink and old paper made her feel alive again, as if she were back in college, when the world had once seemed within her grasp. The workday had ended, but Ethan stepped inside, a cup of coffee in hand, his eyes briefly surprised to see her still there so late. He pulled out a chair and sat beside her, closer than he needed to be. You work harder than my entire team, he said lightly, a hint of humor in his voice, though his eyes were intent, searching for something deeper. Claire smiled shyly, her cheeks warming. I just want to do well, sir. This opportunity, it means a lot to me. She paused, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the edge of the papers. I don't want to disappoint you. Ethan leaned in, resting an elbow on the table, his gaze locked onto hers. You've read all these documents in one morning and annotated things my strategy team completely missed. If that's not impressive, I don't know what is. Claire lowered her head, trying to hide a smile. But when she looked up again, Ethan's eyes were still on her, deep, unwavering, lingering longer than necessary. For a moment, the space between them seemed to contract, filled only with the soft sound of breathing and the quickening of their hearts. Ethan cleared his throat and looked away, as if he too was startled by whatever had just passed between them. You should go get some rest, he said, his voice rougher than before. Tomorrow will be even busier. Claire nodded, gathering the papers, but as she left the room, she could feel Ethan's eyes following her, a silent promise of things yet unspoken. In the dim hallway, her heart thumped hard, not just from this new opportunity, but from a strange, thrilling sense that fate had just opened a door she'd never dared to dream of. A week had passed, and the conference room on the 42nd floor of Cross Global was steeped in darkness, lit only by the pale blue glow of the projector casting charts and figures onto the white wall. The clock neared 10 o'clock at night, but the air remained heavy, as though the numbers, graphs, and strategies on the screen were still screaming for attention. Claire sat at the far end of the table, her hands aching after hours of note-taking, the old frames of her glasses sliding down her nose. She pushed them back up, her eyes scanning the lines of text, trying not to let exhaustion overtake her. Opposite her, Ethan Cross still sat upright, his expensive gray suit now a little rumpled, the only sign of a long, grueling day. But his deep blue eyes stayed sharp, even if a hint of fatigue seeped through. The meeting had just ended. The rest of the project team had left, leaving only the two of them in the silent room. Ethan tapped his fingers lightly on the table, the sound as steady as the heartbeat of the space itself. "You did well today," he said, his voice low but missing the usual chill. "Your observations about the Eastern European market, they were perceptive. I don't think my team has ever looked at it from that angle." Claire managed a tired smile, her cheeks warming under the dim light. "Thank you, sir. I just tried my best." She bent her head, gathering up the documents, but for a brief instant her eyes met Ethan's, and she realized he was looking at her not as a CEO appraising an employee, but with a deeper curiosity, as if searching for something hidden beneath her unassuming exterior. Ethan stood and walked over to the large window overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The city lights shimmered like a sea of stars against the black sky. He folded his arms, his shoulders dropping slightly, as if he carried a burden no one could see. "You know, Claire," he said, his voice husky, "sometimes I wonder if I really belong here. Cross Global. It's my father's legacy, but it's also a cage." Claire's hands froze on the stack of papers. She looked up, startled. Ethan Cross, the man who always seemed invincible, had just revealed a fracture in his flawless shell. She rose slowly and stepped closer to him, careful to keep enough distance not to intrude on his space. "You're speaking about your father. He must have been a remarkable person," she said softly, her tone an invitation, not a demand. Ethan turned, his eyes darkening as though sinking into a painful memory. "My parents died when I was 14, a car accident." He exhaled, the sound brittle. "I grew up under my Uncle Gregory's supervision. He never let me forget that I was expected to take over this company, even though I never wanted it. When I was 23, he handed me the CEO position, but not because he trusted me. He wanted a puppet, so he could pull the strings from behind the scenes." He let out a dry laugh, a sound like gravel. "I had to learn to fight, to stand firm under the scrutiny and the schemes designed to drag me down. But sometimes, I just want to be myself." His words blew through the room like a cold wind, carrying a loneliness Claire had never imagined could exist in someone like him. She stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly in front of her chest, as if to keep her own rising emotions contained. "I understand," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I've lost a lot too. Not in the same way, but I know what it feels like to hold yourself together just to survive." Ethan looked at her, and his gaze softened, as if he recognized something familiar in her story. "Tell me," he said, not as a command, but almost like a plea. Claire drew a deep breath, her eyes drifting out the window to the city lights blinking like faraway dreams. "My mother, she was everything to me. When I was little, she worked 2 jobs so I could go to college. She always said I would do something great." She paused, her voice catching. "But then she got sick. I dropped out, sold everything worth anything, and took this job to pay for her care. Every day I watch her grow weaker, and I wonder if I'm doing enough. But I can't give up because she's the reason I keep going." The room fell silent, filled only by the quiet sounds of their breathing. Claire felt her eyes burn, but she forced back the tears. She didn't want Ethan to see her vulnerable. But then, unexpectedly, there was warmth. Without a word, Ethan reached out and laid his hand over hers. His touch was strong but gentle, as if he was offering her a piece of the strength he himself was searching for. "You're not weak, Claire," he said, his voice low and warm, and for the first time, he called her by her first name instead of Ms. Bennett. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met. What you've done for your mother, it's something I admire. I've never had that kind of courage." Claire looked up, her eyes meeting his, and in that moment, she saw a completely different Ethan, not the cold CEO, but a man with a heart full of scars, opening up to her. She smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You're not as cold as everyone thinks, Ethan," she said quietly but firmly. "You're just trying to protect yourself." Ethan stilled, as though her words had touched something deep inside him. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze before letting go, as if afraid he had crossed an invisible line. But something between them had shifted, as if an invisible thread had just been tied. Claire felt her heart racing, not only because of the sudden closeness, but because she realized that behind Ethan's perfect exterior was a soul as wounded as hers. "It's late," Ethan said, his voice rough as if he was trying to regain control. "We'll continue tomorrow." Claire nodded, gathering her things and turned to leave. Ethan watched her go, his eyes warm and searching. A light rain fell outside the private office of Gregory Cross, on the top floor of Cross Global, where the lights of Manhattan were blurred behind a thick curtain of fog. The vast room, lined with dark wood paneling and shelves packed with heavy binders, radiated a cold authority. Gregory, a man in his 50s with neatly slicked back salt and pepper hair, sat behind the massive desk, his sharp eyes scanning a financial report. His lips were pressed into a tight line, a deep crease etched between his brows, a sign of simmering anger. In front of him, Vivian stood straight in her form-fitting black business dress, but her gaze had lost its usual confidence. Instead, there was a flicker of worry mixed with determination. "We calculated everything," Vivian said, her voice crisp but deliberately low, as if she feared the walls themselves might be listening. The interpreter was arranged to disappear, the meeting with the Swiss conglomerate was supposed to collapse, and Ethan would be called before the board. But she paused, her hands curling into tight fists. "Claire Bennett, a janitor girl, she ruined everything." Gregory raised an eyebrow, tapping his finger lightly on the ebony desk in a steady, ominous rhythm. "I've heard about her performance," he said, his tone low, carrying a hint of contempt. "A janitor, no degree, no experience managing to impress Hans Muller of Switzerland. She didn't just save the contract, she made Ethan look like a genius for discovering her." Vivian stepped closer to the desk, her eyes flashing with undisguised jealousy. "She's not just an inconvenience, Gregory. She's becoming Ethan's trusted ally. I've seen the way he looks at her, the way he's brought her onto the international projects team. If we don't act quickly, she'll help him secure his position, and then our plan will collapse." Gregory stood and slowly walked over to the window, staring down at the stream of cars glittering beneath the streetlights. "You're right," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Ethan is becoming difficult to control. I let him have the CEO's chair because I thought he'd be easy to manipulate. But the boy's more stubborn than I expected. And now, with that girl beside him, he could become a real threat." Vivian tilted her head, a thin smile forming on her lips, though her eyes remained sharp and cold. "You remember your promise, don't you, Gregory? If Ethan is removed, you will nominate me as Chief Executive Officer. I've worked for Cross Global for 10 years. I deserve that position more than anyone." Gregory turned, his gaze sweeping over Vivian as if weighing the worth of a chess piece. "I haven't forgotten, Vivian," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, laced with unspoken meaning. "But if you want that chair, you need to prove you can handle this situation. Claire Bennett may be a small problem, but she's in the right place at the right time. We must remove her first. Then Ethan will be vulnerable." Vivian nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line, her eyes glittering with a dangerous resolve. "I've already thought of that. Claire has no background, no connections in the company. It will be easy to make her look unreliable. One small mistake, a leaked document, or an accusation of betrayal. The board will never tolerate a janitor in high-level projects if she's under suspicion." Gregory allowed himself a cold smile for the first time that evening. "Good, but be careful, Vivian. Ethan isn't a fool. If he discovers we're pulling the strings, He'll strike back. Start with Claire. Find a way to discredit her, and through her, weaken Ethan. I want to see him fail in the next board meeting. Vivian bowed her head, a movement both respectful and calculating. I'll handle it, sir. Claire Bennett will no longer be a problem within a few weeks. Elsewhere in the Cross Global building, Claire sat in a brightly lit office, poring over project documents. She had no idea that, in a dark boardroom above her, her future was being decided by meticulously laid plans. Her eyes stayed fixed on the numbers and strategies before her, but deep inside she felt a growing spark of hope, a hope that this opportunity might finally be the turning point to change her life. Meanwhile, in a small cafe a few blocks from Cross Global, Vivian sat alone, her fingers gliding over her phone screen. She checked the attachment again, a set of sensitive Swiss project documents, carefully marked to appear as if Claire had sent them by mistake. Vivian's smile was icy as she tapped send. She'll never see it coming, she whispered, her eyes glinting with vicious confidence. She stood, smoothed her dress, and stepped out into the rain, her silhouette dissolving into the shadows of Manhattan. The plan was in motion, and Claire Bennett, the janitor who had once saved $1 billion contract, was now the first prey in Vivian and Gregory's ruthless game of power. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Rain poured relentlessly, draping Manhattan's streets in a curtain of gray water. Inside Cross Global, the air was stifling, like the hush before a violent storm. Early Monday morning, an anonymous email was sent to the board of directors. Attached to it, a set of sensitive Swiss project files, detailed secrets of pricing strategies, and the roadmap for expansion into Eastern Europe. If those documents landed in a competitor's hands, Cross Global could lose a contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars and watch its international reputation collapse. The legal team sprang into action immediately. In a small conference room, stark white fluorescent lights illuminated tense faces. Ms. Thompson, the head of legal, a middle-aged woman with eyes sharp as blades, stood at the table, her voice steady but cold. We traced the email, she announced. It was sent from an internal account belonging to Claire Bennett. She pushed a printed packet across the table, the bold type spelling out the email address and timestamp. This is incontrovertible evidence. This document poses a severe risk to the company. Ethan Cross, seated at the head of the table, gripped the chair arms so hard his knuckles turned white. His deep blue eyes flicked over the page, but inside, a storm of disbelief and anger was raging. Claire, the woman who had saved the Swiss contract, who had spent hours by his side analyzing strategy, she couldn't be the traitor. Yet the evidence lay before him, undeniable as daylight. Are we sure this isn't a mistake? He asked, his voice low but edged, as though he was straining to keep control. Ms. Thompson adjusted her glasses, her expression unflinching. We triple-checked the system logs, Mr. Cross. The email originated from Ms. Bennett's account. In the corner, Vivian pressed her lips together to hide a discreet smile. She bowed her head, pretending to study the file, but her eyes glimmered with satisfaction. Her plan with Gregory was unfolding exactly as intended. Ethan pushed back his chair and stood abruptly, shadows darkening his face. I want further investigation. But in the meantime, what does protocol require? He hated himself for asking, but as CEO, he had no choice but to follow the rules. Ms. Thompson's reply was devoid of emotion. Ms. Bennett will be immediately suspended pending investigation. She has 7 days to prepare for a hearing before the board. If she cannot prove her innocence, she will be terminated and may face legal action. Ethan pressed his lips together, his chest so heavy he could hardly breathe. He didn't want to believe Claire could have done this, but the evidence and the board's pressure left no room for sentiment. Very well, he said, his voice hoarse. Notify her. Claire received the notification late that morning. Ms. Thompson stood in front of her, voice as icy as her expression. Ms. Bennett, you are suspended effective immediately under suspicion of leaking sensitive documents. This is your formal notice. You must leave the building at once. Claire felt the floor vanish beneath her feet. She shook her head, clutching her worn canvas bag with trembling hands. No, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't send that email. Her voice cracked, tears welling as she looked at Miss Thompson, desperate for even a flicker of belief. But the woman turned away, leaving Claire standing frozen in the hallway. Curious eyes darted toward her, whispers cutting like knives. She was the one who saved the Swiss contract, wasn't she? Why betray the company? Claire bowed her head and hurried out of the building, not even pausing for her coat. Rain pummeled her thin sweater until it clung to her skin, but she felt no cold, only the ache inside her chest, far deeper than any storm. She had given everything, poured her heart into the chance Ethan had offered her, and now it had all fallen apart, and she feared even Ethan had lost faith in her. That night, the rain continued without pause, turning Claire's small apartment into a lonely island. She sat curled up in a chair, the dim glow of her old table lamp casting her face in a pale light. Her mother, Margaret, slept in the next room, her faint breathing blending with the rain tapping the window. Claire held her head in her hands, her eyes red and swollen as tears streaked down her cheeks. She couldn't understand how this had happened. Leaked documents? An email from her account? She had never touched those files outside her work with Ethan. But who would ever believe a lowly janitor over such clear evidence? A sudden knock at the door broke through her spiraling thoughts. Claire wiped her tears quickly and walked over to open it, her heart leaden. In the dim hallway light, Ethan stood there, rain dripping from his hair onto his dark coat. His eyes, usually so controlled and penetrating, were raw with worry and determination. "Claire," he said, his voice hoarse, almost drowned out by the rain. "We need to talk." Claire stepped back, her fingers clutching the doorframe, her gaze shimmering with hurt. "Why are you here, Mr. Cross? I've been suspended. You think I betrayed you, don't you?" Her voice trembled, every word slicing into her own heart. Ethan stepped inside without hesitation, water pooling on the floor around him. He came close, so close she could feel his warmth despite the rain. "I don't believe you did this," he said, his voice firm but carrying a note of uncertainty. "But the evidence, it's stacked against you. I need to hear it from you, Claire. Tell me the truth." She looked up at him, tears spilling freely now, unable to hold them back. "I swear to you, Ethan, I didn't send that email. I don't know what's happening, but I would never betray you or this company. You gave me a chance. You believed in me. I would never do that. Please, you have to believe me." Her voice broke, her shoulders shaking in her soaked sweater. Ethan looked at her, torn between reason and something deeper. Then he stepped forward, pulled her into his arms without another word. Claire froze, stunned, before letting herself sink against his chest, feeling his warmth seep through her chilled clothes. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered, his voice unsteady, his hand tightening on her shoulder as if he feared she might vanish. "I will find out the truth, Claire. I promise." She lifted her face to his, tears still falling, but in her eyes a glimmer of hope returned. She laid her hand against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. "Thank you. Thank you for believing me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. In the tiny apartment, with the storm raging outside, they stood together, holding each other like two lost pieces finally reunited. But Ethan knew that somewhere in the shadows, the one behind this scheme was waiting for the next move. In Ethan's private home, the air was taut as a drawn wire. A large glass table was piled high with documents. A computer screen glowed with investigative reports, and a cup of black coffee sat cold and forgotten in the corner. Claire sat beside Ethan, her eyes fixed on a new stack of papers, her hands moving quickly over the pages as she scribbled notes in pencil. Ethan leaned against the window, the city lights casting angular shadows across his face, highlighting the deep blue of his eyes that now burned with unwavering determination. He had just ended a call with an independent investigative team, a group of cybersecurity and legal experts he had hired the moment Claire was suspended. "They confirmed it," he said, his voice low and sharp as a blade. "The email that leaked the documents was sent from your account, but the access trail leads to a computer in Vivian's office. She hacked your account, Claire." Claire looked up, her brown eyes shining with a mix of relief and anger. "I knew it," she whispered, her fingers tightening around her pencil. "I never touched those documents outside of working hours with you. But why would she do this? Just to get rid of me?" Ethan shook his head, his gaze darkening. It's more than that. He stepped forward, laying a thick report from the investigators on the table. They dug deeper and found that Vivian sent the Swiss project files, not just the leaked version from your account, but critical strategic details to an external address. The IP traces back to a rival company, and Vivian isn't working alone. She's been collaborating with my uncle Gregory. Claire felt her heart constrict. She skimmed the report, where anonymous emails and internal security footage were printed in stark detail. One video showed Vivian slipping into Claire's office late at night, typing quickly on her computer. An audio recording from the internal phone system played Vivian's voice, cold and calculated. I sent the documents to the competitor, Gregory. When the Swiss project collapses, the board will blame Ethan. He'll lose the CEO seat. Gregory's reply came through deep and cruel. Well done, Vivian. Claire is just a small obstacle. When the project fails, Ethan won't have any chance left to stand against us. Ethan's hands balled into fists, his knuckles bone white. My uncle, he whispered, voice raw with pain. He raised me, pushed me into this position, but now he wants to destroy me just to keep control of the company. He turned to Claire, his eyes blazing with resolve. We can't let them win, but the Swiss project has already been compromised. If we don't act fast, this contract will fall apart. Claire nodded, her gaze steady. Then we need a new plan. The Swiss partners still trust you, Ethan. We can rebuild the strategy, focus on strengths the competitors don't know. She flipped quickly through a binder, pointing at the notes she had made about the Eastern European market. If we propose a route to optimize shipping costs, combined with new tariff incentives, they'll see value no one else can offer. Ethan leaned in, his shoulder brushing lightly against hers, his eyes brightening as he read her notes. You're right, he said, voice rising with determination. This is how we save the contract. But we only have a week before the next meeting with Hans Muller. Are you ready for this? Claire smiled, though the dark circles under her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. I'm ready, Ethan. Not just to clear my name, but to prove they can't break us. In the nights that followed, the office became their battleground. Claire and Ethan worked without pause, building a new negotiation proposal from the ground up. They pored over market data, drafted financial plans, and even developed a creative marketing strategy to win the Swiss partners back. The long, tense nights pulled them closer together. In a quiet moment of fatigue, when Claire had slumped over the table, Ethan gently reached for her hand, his fingers threading through hers like an unspoken promise. Are you okay? He asked, his voice soft, eyes warm as they searched hers. Claire lifted her head, her cheeks tinged pink. I'm fine, just tired. She squeezed his hand back, feeling the heat of his palm. But I'm not doing this just to reclaim my honor, Ethan. I'm doing it for you, because I can't stand to see you lose what you fought so hard to protect. Ethan went still, his gaze locking on hers, deep and fierce. Claire, he murmured, voice husky, you don't know how much you mean to me. He leaned in a fraction closer, and in that moment, the space between them seemed to disappear, leaving only the quiet sound of their breaths and the racing of their hearts. Claire felt her own heart tremble, not just from the weight of their fight against this conspiracy, but from something bigger, a feeling that was growing, urgent, and real. She knew she wasn't just fighting for her name anymore. She was fighting for Ethan, for the man who had believed in her, who had opened his heart, and who was becoming an irreplaceable part of her life. We'll do this, she whispered, her eyes shining with determination. Together! Ethan smiled, his hands still wrapped firmly around hers. Together, he echoed, his voice steady as a vow. In the softly lit room, surrounded by documents and the glow of the city beyond the glass, they stood shoulder to shoulder, not just allies in a battle against treachery, but two hearts finding each other in the middle of the storm. The rain had stopped, leaving Manhattan's sky clear and bright beneath the early autumn sun. But inside the conference room on the 42nd floor of Cross Global, the atmosphere was as sharp and cold as a drawn blade. Today, the board of directors convened at Gregory's request. The board members sat around the glossy ebony table, their eyes trained sharply on Ethan Cross, who stood tall at the head of the room, dressed in a fitted navy suit, his chiseled face impassive. Across from him, Gregory Cross, Ethan's uncle, sat with a self-satisfied smile, his hand resting on a thick stack of documents, certain that today would be the day he toppled his nephew. Vivian stood in the corner, clad in a sleek black dress, her eyes glittering with triumph, as if she already tasted victory. A week earlier, Ethan and Claire had secretly taken a red-eye flight to Zurich to meet Hans Miller, head of the Swiss partners, 3 days ahead of the official negotiation schedule. In a discreet meeting room, Ethan and Claire presented a new proposal. It was a breakthrough strategy, combining an optimized shipping plan with tax incentives based on the EU's new trade agreements. "We can cut transportation costs by 18%, Claire said, her eyes bright, her neatly organized documents held like a weapon. "Additionally, Cross Global will provide exclusive market data to guarantee your competitive advantage." Hans Miller, known for being notoriously hard to impress, allowed a rare smile to crease his face. "Ms. Bennett, you're not only intelligent, you have vision. We are very impressed." Ethan, seated beside her, couldn't tear his eyes away from Claire, pride swelling in his chest. The contract was signed that very night on the condition of absolute secrecy to keep it hidden from competitors and from the traders inside Cross Global. 3 days later, Ethan deliberately leaked the rumor that the Swiss partners had suspended negotiations, feigning concern to draw his enemies into the open. Today, in this boardroom, it was time for Ethan and Claire to turn the tables. Gregory rose, his voice deep and commanding, but edged with malice. "Members of the board," he began, his eyes sweeping over Ethan like a hawk sizing up prey. "The Swiss project is undeniable proof of Ethan Cross's incompetence. Sensitive strategy documents were leaked, our competitors gained the upper hand, and a billion-dollar contract is now all but destroyed. The Swiss partners have canceled negotiations with us. I propose that Ethan be removed as CEO before Cross Global suffers further losses." A wave of murmurs swept across the room. Several board members nodded, casting doubtful looks at Ethan. Vivian stepped forward and handed Gregory a file, her thin smile sharp and calculating. "This is a detailed report of Mr. Cross's failures," she said, her voice sweet but icy. "We cannot allow this company to remain in the hands of someone so irresponsible." Ethan stood motionless, arms folded, his blue eyes steady and unreadable. He had prepared for this moment. "Before the board reaches a decision," he began, his voice calm and commanding, echoing through the room, "I'd like you to review some critical information." The boardroom door swung open, and Claire stepped in, her presence confident but unpretentious. A tailored black suit hugged her slender frame, her brown hair was tied back neatly, and her eyes burned with clear resolve. In her hand was a small USB drive containing all the evidence Ethan's independent team had gathered over the past week. Every eye turned to her, some surprised, some skeptical. Gregory frowned and Vivian froze, her complexion draining pale as the thin smile vanished from her lips. Claire walked to the table and plugged the USB into the projector. Ethan moved to her side, resting his hand lightly on her back, a subtle gesture, but enough to bolster her strength. She turned to look at him, their eyes locking in a brief, silent promise. "Members of the board," Claire began, her voice clear and cutting, "I'd like to present evidence of a conspiracy designed to sabotage Mr. Cross and Cross Global." The screen lit up, displaying a chain of emails recovered from the server. One email from Vivian's account sent sensitive documents to a rival company, along with digital traces proving she had hacked Claire's account to fabricate evidence. Then a recording began to play, crisp and undeniable. Vivian's voice, cold and calculating, echoed in the silent room. "I've sent the documents to the competitor, Gregory. Once the Swiss project collapses, the board will blame Ethan. He'll lose the CEO seat." Gregory's voice replied, deep and cruel. "Well done, Vivian. Remove Claire first, then I'll make the board see Ethan as incompetent. Cross Global will be ours." A stunned silence fell, as though all the air had been sucked from the room. The board members exchanged glances, faces shifting from shock to fury. Gregory leapt to his feet, his face flushed scarlet, voice cracking as he roared. "This is a fabrication. You dare accuse me of this, Ethan? I built this company with your father from nothing. If I wanted to steal it, I never would have made you CEO." But his voice quivered and panic flickered in his eyes. Vivian, still in the corner, clenched her hands so tightly her nails dug into her palms. "That isn't my voice!" she screamed, but the desperation in her tone made her protest ring hollow. Ethan stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the room with unshakable authority. "The independent investigators have authenticated this evidence," he said, his voice glacial. "But more importantly, the Swiss project has not failed." He pressed a button on the remote, and the screen displayed the signed contract bearing Hans Muller's signature. "Last week, Miss Bennett and I met the Swiss partners and finalized the agreement with our new proposal. The project was never compromised by the leak. Cross Global has not only secured the contract, but has strengthened its position in the global market." A ripple of murmurs exploded. Mr. Carter, a senior board member, stood, his eyes bright. "Ethan, are you saying the project succeeded, and you knew about the scheme all along?" Ethan nodded. Claire continued, her voice unwavering. "We worked with investigators to expose this conspiracy. Vivian and Mr. Gregory didn't just try to frame me. They deliberately tried to sabotage the Swiss project to depose Mr. Cross. But we acted in time." Ethan laid a steady hand on Claire's shoulder, his eyes resolute. "I recommend the board consider removing these traitors, Vivian and my uncle, Gregory Cross. Cross Global is not a pawn for personal ambition." Gregory slammed his palm on the table, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "You'll regret this, Ethan." But the board members were already turning to him with looks of cold distrust, and he knew there was no way back. Claire stood tall, feeling the warmth of Ethan's hand anchoring her. In that moment, she was not only fighting for her own name, but for Ethan's faith, for Cross Global, and for a feeling growing deep in her chest. Their eyes met brief but fierce, like a vow that no matter what storm lay ahead, they would face it shoulder to shoulder. The board members sat around the table, their expressions solemn but carrying a rare sense of unanimity. After the recordings and evidence from the independent investigators were presented, the truth was as clear as daylight. Gregory Cross and Vivian had conspired to sabotage the Swiss project to overthrow Ethan. Mr. Carter, the board's senior member, rose, his voice resonating through the room. "Ms. Bennett, we have reviewed the evidence and concluded that you are entirely innocent. Your actions not only saved the Swiss contract, but protected the honor of Cross Global. We apologize for the doubts previously cast upon you." He turned to Gregory, his gaze icy. "As for you, Mr. Gregory Cross, given your betrayal of this company, I call for a vote of no confidence." The vote was unanimous. Gregory was removed from all positions. Vivian was also to be terminated immediately. Gregory sat still, his face drained of color, hands trembling on the polished table. He wanted to protest, but the board's cold stares were sharper than any blade. He could only lower his head and silently leave under the escort of security. Vivian, standing in the corner, could no longer maintain her usual poise. She clutched her handbag so tightly her knuckles whitened, her eyes glimmering with desperation, then turned on her heel and walked out, her figure disappearing beyond the doors. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his deep blue gaze sweeping the room with unshakable authority. He nodded toward Mr. Carter. "Thank you, members of the board, for your fair decision." Then he turned to Claire, and his expression softened as if he were looking at the most precious thing he had ever held. "But I have a proposal. In recognition of Ms. Bennett's skill and dedication, I recommend she be appointed Director of International Projects, overseeing strategic contracts, beginning with the Swiss account." A wave of surprised murmurs filled the room, but Mr. Carter smiled and nodded. "I agree. Ms. Bennett has proven she is worthy." The other board members nodded in assent, and a round of applause erupted, making Claire pause, her cheeks flushing pink in surprise. She stood tall, her eyes bright with gratitude, but in her heart she only wanted to look at Ethan, the man who had believed in her, who had stood by her through the storm. Late in the day, on the highest rooftop of Cross Global, a soft breeze stirred. The city lights had begun to glitter far below them, like a sea of stars stretching into infinity. Claire leaned against the railing, the tailored black suit hugging her slender figure, her brown hair fluttering loose in the wind. She stared out at the skyline, her heart brimming with emotions, from the pain of those days she was doubted, to the joy of victory, and now a feeling stronger and more profound than anything she had ever known. Ethan approached, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up, his dark hair tousled by the wind. He stopped beside her, his gaze never leaving her face, as though he was trying to memorize every detail. "You did it, Claire," he said, his voice low and warm, carrying a sincerity he rarely showed. "You didn't just save the Swiss contract. You didn't just save the company. You saved my heart." Claire turned to him, her brown eyes wide, shimmering with tears under the sunset. She smiled, but her smile quivered, as if she were holding back a tide of emotion. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick, "you gave me a chance. You believed in me when no one else would. I don't know if I deserve everything that's happened, but I do know I don't want to lose you." Ethan stepped closer, his hand lifting to cup her cheek, his fingertips brushing away a tear. "I love you, Claire," he said, voice husky, as though the words had been waiting too long to be spoken. "You're not only the smartest person I've ever met, but the strongest. You made me believe this heart could still love, even after everything it's been through." Claire looked into his eyes, her heart beating so hard it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them on this rooftop. She laid her hand over his chest, feeling the strong rhythm of his heart beneath the fabric of his shirt. "You saved me too, Ethan," she whispered, her voice full of quiet conviction. "Not just from doubt, but from the fear that I couldn't rise again. I love you." In that moment, under the blazing sunset, Ethan lowered his head, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was both tender and fierce, a vow between two souls who had found each other after the storm. Claire closed her eyes, tears shimmering on her lashes, but her smile was brighter than ever. The wind swept past, carrying the soft murmurs of love, and on the highest rooftop in Manhattan, they stood together, arms around each other, knowing that no matter what came next, they would always stand side by side. You're watching Soul Stories exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment we read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt, original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. 1 year later, golden autumn sunlight poured over the Cross Global building, streaming through the towering glass windows and flooding the 42nd floor conference room like a blessing from Manhattan's sky. Today, the room was more radiant than ever, not only because of the natural light, but because of the celebratory atmosphere of the recognition ceremony. The board members, employees, and representatives from international partners filled every seat, all eyes fixed on the podium where Claire Bennett stood with a brilliant, confident presence. A deep blue suit hugged her slender figure. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her brown eyes shone like a flame that could never be extinguished. A year ago, Claire had been just a janitor, pushing her cleaning cart through silent corridors, invisible to most. But today, she was the director of international projects, the leader who had guided Cross Global to sweeping success on the world stage. Under her leadership, the Europe project had not only secured billions in contracts with corporations across Germany, France, and Italy, but had also expanded the partner network into Poland and Sweden, positioning Cross Global among the industry's most powerful firms. Articles in Financial Times and Forbes praised her as a rising star, a symbol of triumph over adversity, a woman who left college to care for her mother and rose to become a visionary leader. Mr. Carter, the board's senior member, stood, his voice resonant in the bright room. "Ms. Claire Bennett," he began, his eyes shining with respect. "From a janitor, you have proven that talent and courage can overcome any barrier. You did not only save the Swiss contract from sabotage, you elevated Cross Global to new heights. Today, we honor you not just for your achievements, but for your indomitable spirit and your honest heart." Applause thundered, echoing like a symphony. Claire bowed her head, her cheeks flushing, but her eyes gleamed with gratitude. She stepped up to the podium, taking the microphone, her voice clear and strong. "I once thought I was nothing but an invisible figure in this building," she said, her gaze sweeping the room before stopping on Ethan Cross, who stood at the edge of the crowd, his deep blue eyes bright with pride. "But thanks to the trust of Mr. Cross, of all of you, and of my own heart, I learned that no one stays invisible forever if they have the courage to stand up. I thank you all, and especially my mother, who gave me the strength to never give up. In the front row, Margaret Clare's mother sat with tears shining in her eyes. Her silver hair was tied neatly, her simple blue dress highlighting the gentle grace of a woman who had survived a grave illness. 1 year ago, she had still been confined to a hospital bed, but now, thanks to Claire's care and love, she had recovered almost completely. She rose and embraced her daughter tightly as Claire stepped down from the podium, whispering, "You are my light, Claire. I never doubted you." Claire squeezed her mother's hand, tears glimmering but her smile radiant. "It's all because of you," she whispered, her voice thick. "You are the reason I never gave up." When the ceremony ended, the sunset cast Manhattan's skyline in warm gold, spilling across the 42nd floor hallway. Claire and Ethan walked out of the conference room hand in hand, their quiet steps blending into the hushed space. Ethan stopped, gently turning Claire to face him. His eyes, dark as the night sky, locked onto hers with a sincerity he didn't try to hide. "Claire," he said, his voice low and warm, "a year ago, I thought I was only fighting to keep this company. But you changed everything. You didn't just save Cross Global. You showed me that this heart can still love, that it can still trust." He lifted her hand, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles, his fingertips brushing her skin like a promise. Claire smiled, her heart beating fast but no longer with the anxiety of those old days. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice certain, "you gave me the chance to prove my worth not because of where I came from, but because of who I am. I love you, not because you're the CEO, but because you were the one who stood by me when the whole world turned away." Ethan lowered his forehead to rest against hers, their breaths mingling in the quiet. "And I love you," he murmured, his voice husky, "because you are the light I never knew I needed until you walked into my life." They stood together in silence, hands clasped, the sunset wrapping them in a golden blessing. Cross Global, once a battlefield of schemes and suspicion, had become the place where a new journey began, the journey of two hearts that had found each other through every trial.